I shouldn't have touched the money. The burial of Chief Okafor was the kind that people would talk about for years. He had been a powerful man in life, and in death, his wealth spoke even louder. The village square overflowed with influential guests, family, friends, and those who had no connection to him but came for the food and drinks. The air was thick with the scent of palm wine and freshly cooked jollof rice. Drums pounded in a steady rhythm, masquerades leaped and twirled, and women in bright wrappers swayed their hips, their laughter echoing through the compound. And then, as expected, the real spectacle began. The spraying of money on the coffin. Bundles of crisp notes flew into the air, showering on the coffin. The richer the guests, the more they threw, as if proving their status with every note that left their hands. The ground was littered with money, stepped on, ignored. No one bent to pick it up. Not even the children. But among the crowd stood Uchechi, a struggling market woman. She watched the notes flutter to the ground, her lips pressed together. For days, she had barely managed to feed her children. The market had been slow, and debt hung over her like a dark cloud. And now, before her, money lay in the dust, free for the taking. She glanced around. Everyone was too busy dancing, drinking, and celebrating. Her fingers twitched. Carefully, she bent down, pretending to adjust her wrapper. In one swift movement, she grabbed a handful of the scattered notes and tucked them into her cloth. A sudden cold breeze rushed through the compound. The drummers missed a beat. The laughter around her faded for a brief moment, replaced by an eerie silence. A shiver ran through her body. Her mother had once warned about this. Money sprayed at burials is not ordinary, she would say. It belongs to the dead. Uchechi swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away. The drums picked up again, the chatter returned, and the moment passed. She exhaled, shaking off the uneasy feeling. It was just money. Nothing would happen. The burial ceremony continued till late in the night. Everybody went to their various homes. That night, Uchechi sat on her mat, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Slowly, she untied the edge of her wrapper and pulled out the money she had taken. The crisp notes felt warm in her hands. As she counted the money, a cold breeze swept through the room. The flame of the lantern flickered violently, almost going out. A shiver crawled up her spine, but she ignored it and continued counting. When she was done, she was happy and satisfied with the money she got. She kept the money in a bag and went to bed. Uchechi tossed and turned in her sleep. Her dreams were not her own. In her dream, she was back at the burial. The drumming was loud, too loud. The people were dancing, but something was wrong. Their faces were empty, their eyes black pits. And then she saw him. Chief Okafor. He was standing in the middle of the crowd, staring straight at her. Then suddenly shouted, "Give it back." The words boomed and echoed inside her skull. She jerked awake, gasping. Her entire body was covered in sweat. But something was wrong. The room was too cold. And then, knock, knock, knock. A slow, deliberate knocking on her door. Uchechi's breath hitched. She turned her head toward the door, her heart pounding. "Who is there?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Silence. She swallowed hard. Maybe it was the wind. Then, knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. She jumped out of bed and grabbed her lantern. Her hands shook as she stepped toward the door. She hesitated. And then, gathering courage, she flung the door open. No one was there. A cold wind rushed past her, sending chills down her spine. She quickly shut the door, her hands trembling. Then, just as she turned to go back to bed, she heard a whisper right behind her. "Uchechi." A small voice called. She froze. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't turn around. Instead, she rushed to her room, slipped into her bed and pulled the blanket over her head, her heart hammering against her ribs. She squeezed her eyes shut. The next morning, Uchechi refused to stay in the house. She decided to go to the market. So she hurried to the market, with her wrapper tied firmly, determined to forget the night before. She walked into Mom Nkechi's store to buy tomatoes. "Auntie Uchechi, good morning." The seller greeted her warmly. Uchechi nodded, but her eyes kept darting around. "My dear, are you alright?" Mom Nkechi asked, eyeing her closely. Before Uchechi could answer, a strong wind blew through the market. Pots and baskets tumbled over. Women grabbed their goods, shielding them. Then Uchechi managed a weak smile. "I just want to buy small tomatoes," she muttered, pulling out some of the money she had taken from the burial. Mom Nkechi packaged the tomatoes in a small nylon bag and held out her hand for the money. But the moment Uchechi placed the notes in her palm, Mom Nkechi's body jerked violently. And then, she collapsed to the ground, convulsing. Screams erupted. Women rushed to her side. Some grabbed water, others shouted prayers. Uchechi staggered back, her hands trembling. "This is not an ordinary money," she muttered. Someone grabbed her arm. It was Mama Chisholm. "What did you do to her?" The woman screamed, shaking Uchechi. Uchechi couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She only knew one thing. She had to get rid of that money before it was too late. Uchechi ran. She didn't know where she was going, but she just had to get away. The market was still in chaos, with people surrounding Mama Nkechi, fanning her and sprinkling water on her face. But Uchechi couldn't stay there. Not after what had just happened. Her feet pounded against the dusty road, her heartbeat racing faster than her legs. When she finally reached her house, she slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, gasping for air. Her eyes darted to the money still in her hand. "I need to get rid of this thing," she whispered. She brought out the remaining money and grabbed a matchstick, ran outside, and set the money on fire. The flames rose fast and high, consuming the notes within seconds. After some time, the fire died. And when the smoke cleared, the money was still there, looking as if nothing happened to it. Uchechi screamed and stumbled back. She could barely breathe. Her hands shook violently as she backed away from the cursed notes. As she turned to enter her house, she noticed that the room inside was pitch black, darker than it should have been in the afternoon. She took one shaky step forward, peering inside. And then, a shadow moved. Something was in her house. Uchechi's stomach twisted. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, just as she turned to run, she heard a voice right beside her ear. "Uchechi, you can't run." She screamed and ran out of her compound. That night, Uchechi couldn't sleep. She sat up on her bed, clutching her knees, staring at the lantern's flickering light. The air felt thick, suffocating. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like something was watching her, waiting for her to close her eyes. By morning, her mind was made up. She needed help. Baba Kolu was the oldest dibia in the village. People only went to him when things had gone beyond the ordinary. Uchechi didn't even greet anyone as she walked through the village. She covered her head with her scarf, avoiding eye contact. The market women were still talking about Mom Nkechi's collapse, but Uchechi couldn't stop. She reached Baba Kolu's shrine, a small mud hut hidden behind a giant iroko tree. The old man was sitting on a stool, grinding herbs. His wrinkled face was calm, but his eyes held something deeper, like he already knew why she was there. I have been expecting you, he said. Uchechi's breath hitched. Please, Baba, something is following me, she whispered, falling to her knees. She placed the money in front of him. Baba Kalu didn't touch it. He only stared at the money, his eyes darkening. Then he said the words that made Uchechi's skin crawl. This money does not belong to the living. Uchechi swallowed hard. What do you mean? Baba Kalu exhaled. You took money sprayed for the dead. And now, the owner has come for it. Uchechi's stomach twisted. I didn't know. I just... Baba Kalu held up his hand, silencing her. It does not matter. The spirits do not care if you know or not. You have something that belongs to them. And if you don't return it properly, you will go with them. What do I do? She asked. Baba Kalu picked up a small black calabash and shook it 3 times. You must return it to the graveyard. Tonight. Uchechi's body stiffened. At midnight, take the money back to the burial ground. Place it exactly where you found it. Say these words. He leaned in, whispering some words in her ear. Do not look back. No matter what happens. Uchechi's hands trembled as she took the calabash. If you fail, Uchechi, they will come for you, Baba Kalu said. That night, Uchechi's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She sat in her room, staring at the black calabash on her mat. The lantern flickered beside her, casting long shadows on the mud walls. Her heart beat loudly. She had spent the whole evening thinking of running away. But Baba Kalu's words haunted her. If you fail, they will come for you. A sharp wind howled outside. It was almost midnight. She had to go. The village was silent. Too silent. Even the usual night sounds like the hooting of owls and the chirping of crickets were gone. Uchechi wrapped a cloth around herself and stepped outside. The moment she did, a cold breeze blew past her, chilling her skin. She gripped the calabash tightly and started walking toward the burial ground. The road felt longer than usual. The trees swayed without wind and the shadows seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. Then she heard soft footsteps behind her. Something, or someone, was walking behind her. She didn't turn around. The footsteps grew louder. Then she heard a voice behind her. Uchechi, where are you going? Uchechi froze. A shiver crawled up her spine. She forced her feet to move. She walked faster, gripping the money inside the calabash so tightly. The graveyard gate was in sight. Just a few more steps, she assured herself. The moment Uchechi stepped into the graveyard, the air changed. It became thicker and heavier, like she had walked into a place she wasn't supposed to be. The graves were visible under the dim moonlight. The fresh mound of earth where the burial of the chief had taken place still looked disturbed. She swallowed hard and approached it. With trembling hands, she pulled out the money and placed it on the grave. Then she said the words Baba Kalu had told her. Take what is yours, and leave me in peace. The wind stopped. Everything became deathly silent. For a moment, Uchechi felt relieved. Maybe it was over. Suddenly a cold hand grabbed her ankle. Uchechi's breath caught in her throat. She looked down. A rotting bony hand had burst out of the soil, gripping her leg tightly. Her entire body locked in terror. The ground began to shake. Another hand crawled out. Then a head. The same chief whose burial she had attended was rising from the grave. His sunken eyes locked onto her and his cracked lips curled into a slow, rotting grin. You brought it back, but it's too late, the chief said. Uchechi screamed. She yanked her ankle free and ran. But as she did, the whispers returned. Uchechi, don't leave yet. Uchechi, stay with us. Uchechi, look back. But she remembered Baba Kolu's warning. Do not look back. No matter what happens. The voices became louder, hands reached for her feet and shadows moved at the corners of her eyes. The graveyard gate was just ahead. She ran. She did not look back. The moment she stepped out of the burial ground, everything went silent. The air felt normal again. The whispers stopped. The night returned to how it had been. Uchechi collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't even check if the grave was still open. She just lay there, shaking. She was alive but never the same again. By morning, she told herself it was over. She had done everything Baba Kolu said. She had returned the money. It was over. Or